Hi, everyone. I'm Susi Keefe at Hamline University. I'm professor of public health and the director of the Center for Justice and Law. And we're so excited to welcome Sarah Schalker with us today to talk about her experiences and to share some of the things that we all need to know about what it's like to give birth while incarcerated and opportunities to call folks into this conversation. So, Sarah, thank you so much for joining me today. You're our first sort of CJL Spotlight where we're talking about these experiences with someone who's justice impacted. So thank you so much for joining us. I also wanted just all of our viewers to know that the Center for Justice and Law is hosting an entire year of health, justice, and law themed programming. And so this is part of that. And yeah, with that being said, Sarah, do you want to just introduce yourself, like what you want our viewers to know, and tell us a little bit about your experience?
Okay, yes, my name is Sarah Schalker, and I just want to start off by saying that my charges, I take full responsibility for the charges that landed me in prison. I don't want anybody to think that what I'm about to say is me trying to get out of prison or trying to find loopholes for people to not pay their consequences and whatnot. So with that being said, when I was 41 years old, I was sent to Shakopee Women's Prison on an 8.5-year sentence for a first-degree drug charge. I've suffered from addiction my entire life. I've been in and out of treatment. And at this point, the judge decided to send me to prison for my charges. In prison, I went to prison. I was 3 months pregnant with my first child. There, I received very little prenatal care. I was given the bare bones prenatal medicine, and I wasn't seen the women there. So I'm just going to say too, at any given point, there's only about 10 pregnant women out of 600 women in prison. So,
sorry, at the prison where you were?
At Shakopee Women's Prison. Mm-hmm. So I was there for 3 years, and I saw that at any given point, there was really no more than 10 pregnant women at a given time. So for me, that right there sent red flags, like, why is this even a thing? There should be a separate housing for women who are pregnant so that they can get the care they need, so they can get the emotional support they need instead of being in general population. And another thing is too, in Shakopee Women's Prison, there's it's maximum mixed in with minimum security offenders. All offenders are mixed together, so there's no separation of maximum and minimum. So of the 10 pregnant women at any given point, we're just in with everybody. There is a wonderful program, the doula program, that had us meeting once a week for 2 hours where we could sit and talk, and they would go through like the birthing process. And that was a really good experience. And that was something I always looked forward to, and that helped me a lot. And then I was also in the parenting unit, which is you choose to be in it. You're just not automatically in it if you're pregnant. So not all the pregnant women were in there. And you also had to be discipline free to be in that unit. And in that unit, other women had given birth, and that's the only real support that I got, was other offenders that had gone through giving birth in prison. There was no staff that was made available to me besides the doulas that helped me along with my process of being pregnant or giving birth in prison. And that I thought needed to change. But I was thankful to have the parenting unit. Lori Timlin is the parenting coordinator. She's an amazing woman in there, and she's all about change too. She's advocating to try and get separate housing for women who are pregnant and who are giving birth in prison. My experience, I was a very healthy pregnant person. I didn't have any complications. Due to staffing issues, I thought this was really upsetting, was that they scheduled me, I was overdue. So they scheduled me to be induced based on their staffing scheduling. Oh, here. Continue. And so they basically woke me up at 5 o'clock in the morning and said, you're going to have your baby today because that's what our schedule says. And they put me in this disgusting holding cell, and it was really upsetting. And a male officer was trying to tell me, because I was trying to tell him I'm not ready to have my baby. I don't want to have my baby. I don't feel like it's time. And he basically told me that I was a bad mom and that I needed to listen to what the doctors say. And that was very upsetting to me. So what ended up happening was I went to the hospital. The doctor agreed with me and sent me back to prison pregnant. So if you're not willing to advocate for yourself, you can get bullied into having your baby against your will, or just stuff like that due to their scheduling, which is it's upsetting. 3 days later, I did end up going into labor naturally, and I did have my baby 3 days later. The staff, so at the hospital, you always have to have 2 staff in the room with you 24 hours, no matter what you're doing, breastfeeding, going to the bathroom. There's always a staff member in the room with you, and there's no family members allowed at all. As a matter of fact, they won't even tell you when you're going off grounds to see your doctor, because they don't want you to have somebody meet up with you at the hospital. It's a security reason, which I guess I understand, but I basically had just the officers who, a lot of them I grew to really like. So a lot of them were very nice to me and supportive to me, and it was fine to have them in the room with me, but some of them were not that great, and they would go in shifts for 8 hours. So I had my baby, I had her for 3 days, and then I had to hand her over to the nurse, who then I used a program called Together for Good, which is a faith-based program that allows women to have their children taken care of by a family. And then the primary objective is to get mommies back with their children without state involvement. So I used the Together for Good program, which I highly recommend. It was an awesome experience. The family I didn't get to meet. I just had to trust that they would take care of my baby, and I handed my baby over, and then they took me back to prison 3 days after having her. It was really difficult. When I arrived back at the prison, it was on a lockdown, so I couldn't even use the phone. I was just put into my cell, and I had a roommate at the time, and I just cried and slept. They gave me no emotional support, staffing wise, and the only support I had was, again, the women that were in my unit, which were all very supportive. And I don't know what I would have done if the parenting program wasn't a thing. And I just feel like there's such a small amount of women in there that are going through that actually give birth in there, that it shouldn't even be a thing. It should be, the state should have a halfway house or some other sort of incarcerated place just for pregnant women to be able to keep their babies for a short time, because there's no breastfeeding, which I think robs the child of a lot of health benefits. And it's very damaging to the innocent child to be taken away from their mommy after 2 or 3 days. And emotionally, luckily I did not suffer from postpartum, but women who suffer from postpartum, I don't even know what that would be like. They get no support at all. And and that's really all I have here. Another thing too is once I got released, I did an early release program. I did the boot camp CIP program, and I got out early, and the parole that they put me on gave me no time for my children. They expected me to get a job and to do the meetings and to do the volunteer work, and they really gave no time for me to be a mom to my children, of whom one of them I had in prison and couldn't connect with and had no connection with, and I just got thrown back into being a mom. And now I have to do all these things, and they don't consider like being a mom as kind of a job.
Right.
So I feel like that maybe needs to get looked at too. And that's basically all I got. I really
Will
do.
you tell me?
Go ahead.
No, you said that without the parenting program, you would have felt really lost and that you really appreciated that. Will you tell us a little bit about what that offered you and what that was like?
Well, what it offered me is the way that the parenting program worked is being a pregnant woman, you get a pregnant mentor, which is somebody who actually gave birth in there that knows how to mentor you, and they kind of just support you and help you through the whole process, and any questions you have, they're there to answer. And actually, after I had my daughter, I became a mentor for about 2 years to all the pregnant women that came in after me. And it was just very important for me to make sure that they felt like they could advocate for themselves, because nobody tells you that. If you don't stick up for yourself, they will bully you. For example, I went in for one of my pregnancy checks, and they did the heartbeat, and the doctor told me that my baby had a heart condition, and they ordered a ultrasound a week later. So basically, I went for a week thinking my baby has a heart condition, and then when the ultrasound person came and did the ultrasound, she told me that, tell your doctor that he needs to put batteries in his device because it was a battery issue. So just stuff like that. They're not very good medically, and they like bare bones minimum. And I could relay this to the pregnant women coming in that, if you in your gut feel like you need to advocate for yourself, or you feel like something's not right, you have to stick up for yourself, because nobody else is going to in here, medically or emotionally or anything. The prison has an agenda just to keep secure. Their primary focus is to keep the prison secure, and they don't really, pay attention. Men, a lot of them are men, and they just don't get it. They don't get what it's like to be a pregnant woman in there. Or a lot of them are really judgmental, like they look down on you for being a pregnant woman in prison, and they're not, it's just, you get treated kind of terrible. So to have the mentorship in the parenting unit, it's very important. Also, the parenting unit provided, if you're in the unit, you get every other weekend, you get a 4-hour visit with your children, which is a hands-on visit. It's not in the visiting room where you can just sit in the chair and hold your child. It's where you can play with your baby, or you can feed your baby, you can change your baby. It's a 4-hour long hands-on visit. And that's another thing that's very important for the very little connection that you do get with your kid. Mm-hmm. Every other Saturday, it was very important to have at least just that. And that's and
only 4 hours, you said?
It was actually 3.5 hours, but yeah, you would, and it was probably 10 mommies and their kids. So it was never a group bigger than that. And kids of all ages, it could be from infant to 17-year-old. And we would be able to, be normal with our kids. And even that would get kind of disrupted by certain sergeants or officers would see us kissing our babies on the mouth, and they would have meetings about it, and they would make a rule like, you can't kiss your baby on the mouth, that's inappropriate, and just stuff like that would happen. And we would just roll with the punches, and just to keep our kids' visits, they were very important to us. And I know after COVID hit, all visits were taken away, and they still haven't gotten back to the kids' visits in there, as far as I know. Yeah. So, and also Lori Timlin, the parenting coordinator, she would also advocate for women who are going through like CPS issues and, having their children taken away, and helping women resolve those issues with the courts. So just, women who are going through a lot worse circumstances than me would need a lot of emotional support. And like I said, we would only help each other out. And it's the smallest unit. You have to be discipline free to be in the unit. So if you have any kind of discipline, you're not allowed, you're kicked out. Circumstances than me would need a lot of emotional support. And like I said, we would only help each other out. And it's the smallest unit. You have to be discipline free to be in the unit. So if you have any kind of discipline, you're not allowed, you're kicked out. It's difficult for a lot of women to maintain that in there.
Sure.
Yeah. So
you began by sort of talking about what about your story and addiction. And I'm just wondering, you've talked a lot about the lack of resources around pregnancy and parenting and birthing and sort of how precarious all of that is. And I think one of the things that people don't often sort of recognize or know a lot about is what addiction is like in prison, and what resources are available for folks there too. And it just occurred to me as you were talking that maybe that's something you could speak to as well.
Yeah, in prison, they do have different units where you can go to treatment, but then you don't, for me, like to choose which unit I wanted to be in, if I were to choose the treatment unit, I wouldn't be able to be in the parenting unit. So you have to make like a sacrifice. You can't do both. So you have to prioritize. And for me, connection with my daughter and just being around other like-minded women was important. So I picked the Anthony unit to be in the parenting unit. So to get any kind of treatment resources was, there's AA meetings, which were bare minimums, and it's just not available. You have to choose one or the other. They make it very separate. You can't have both. And I think that's a shame that that's the case. For me, my consequence of being in prison made it a lot easy for me to deal with my chemical dependency. And I also had admitted myself into Teen Challenge prior to prison. So I got a little bit of it in Teen Challenge before I went to prison. And basically where I got my support and help for my addiction was in church services. I did a lot of religious services, which they offered, all throughout the week. And that really helped me there. But like I said, when COVID hit, they took away all religious services. They took away all programming. They took away all visiting, and it's remained that way till current. Yeah, they don't have any of that still since March of 2020.
Yeah, almost up on a year here.
Yeah.
So another question I have then, and I think you're sort of, you've gotten at this a lot already, but I'm just wondering if there are things that folks in our community should know, like beyond sort of what you shared with us, and or are there ways in which we can support or elevate the things that you're trying to do to help with the situation?
The advocating that I know that's going on is the Minnesota Doula Project is a really good resource to help advocate for the women in prison. They see the women in their hands-on, and they know their hands are tied a lot of the times. They're always grappling with the policy, and I don't know if it's prison policy or if it's just Shakopee policy. I think that all the prisons they follow the same policy. Even though we're a women's facility, we have to go by the same policy as the men's facility. So there's problems there. And the Minnesota Doula Project probably sees it hands-on, and they are the ones they make the most changes in regards to pregnant women in there. And I think they were working with Lori Timlin and the parenting program to get a place for pregnant women or pregnant offenders to go to have their babies. And that happened right around when COVID hit, so it all got squashed. But as far as I know, that would be the place to go is the Minnesota Doula Project. They're the ones working on the behalf of the women who are in there having babies. And then Lori Timlin of the parenting program is another person in there.
So continuing to support those folks and the good work that they're doing.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm wondering if there's it's really as I'm listening to you share your experience, and the COVID situation has really just exacerbated or made worse, or even as you've said, just stopped access to a lot of these resources, and it's been going for a year now, right? And so all of the folks who've been in your circumstance in this time aren't even getting access to the things that you had access to, and so part of me is thinking about even beyond the Minnesota Prison Doula Project and the parenting program, and really about calling people in to write letters to lawmakers and to really do advocacy work around beyond just in general, but in this time of COVID, right, where this is all so much harder and just cut off completely. I also just think one of the things you said too that just really struck me too was how like you are forced to choose between sort of two things, like, but your identity as someone who is pregnant and also dealing with addiction, like those don't live separately, right? I mean, they're
Right.
connected, and so it seems so obvious and makes so much sense, but the context in which you were experiencing that really forced you into that. So I think it's in terms of thinking through and advocating for that, this is something that really impacted your experience.
Yeah, and I think that writing the lawmakers is very important. I think that if they make the changes, being pregnant is a temporary situation. So if somebody's facing a prison sentence, it's just a matter of time before they have their baby. Let them have their baby at home or in a halfway house situation or on house arrest. Let them experience that at home, and then have them pay their dues when they're done having their baby, instead of, I mean, it's got to cost the state, I don't even know how much money to provide medical services to these women. And if they just allowed these women to have their babies at home, it would, I think, eliminate a lot of that, since there's such a small group of them. And it is a temporary situation. You could become incarcerated after you have your baby, and maybe a year after you have your baby, so you can make your connections. I mean, I really don't know the solution. I'm not saying that women who offend should get out of their charges because they're having a baby. I'm not saying that, but there has to be a better way so that these babies don't suffer from not having their mommies. And like my daughter is 2.5 now, and it's extremely hard to connect with her. She's attached to my mother, which thank God for my mother, but the bond there has been lost. And I'm certain I'll get it back, but it's just going to take some time. But it's very difficult to deal with that. It's a constant reminder of, yeah, I did these bad things, and yeah, I was in this situation, and this is my fault. And it's really hard to deal with.
Can I ask if, since you've been released, are there resources either through the system or in your community that you're taking advantage of?
Not that I'm aware of. And I struggle a lot with my parole because I did an early release program. I'm on intensive supervised release, which I call in every day to agents. They check up on me on a weekly basis. I'm only allowed to go to work and to AA meetings and volunteering. And then I have earned, after a few months now, I've earned myself free time. But before that, I wasn't even allowed the free time. And it's a struggle with them because I was home. I have an adopted 7-year-old. So I was homeschooling him, and they weren't considering that even like a job or like a thing. That was just something I had to squeeze in to what they expected me to do. And there's no resources that I'm aware of to help, connect with my kid, or to help me deal with being a brand new mom straight out of prison after, 3 years of not being a mom. So,
yeah, I just have to say too, I think the implications of COVID on all of this too, right? As you're navigating being under that scrutiny and surveillance with the early release program, and sort of the recognition of what it means to be navigating all that as a parent, as a new status for you, but also then with COVID mixed in. It's many layers and many things, and the way in which it doesn't recognize that or appreciate that or call attention to it.
Yeah, and if it wasn't for the support of my family, I have a very supportive family that helped me with daycare, and they helped me just with my kids and the transition. And for many of the women that I know that have had children in prison, they don't have that family support. they don't have anyone. They get thrown. I don't even know how they navigate their lives back in the community again without family support. I couldn't even begin to imagine what that's like for them. And there does need to be resources to help women, because it very easily, if you get in a situation where you can't handle your children, you could if you have addiction problems,
Sure.
your go-to is to, go back to your addiction. And I can't even imagine what it's like to be a woman who doesn't have family support like I have. I'm very lucky for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Sarah, I'm so grateful that you took the time to chat with us today and about your experiences and the things that you've identified as real barriers and struggles. And there's a lot that we can do to address those things, right? And so I'm really glad that you took the time to chat with us. If you're watching on Facebook, I want to just state we're going to be continuing this series every Thursday at 11:30. So look for more. My dog is saying hello. Look for more of these conversations ongoing. We'll be hearing a lot from doulas who work with the Minnesota Prison Doula Project in the coming weeks. So thank you again, Sarah, and best of luck to you. And we really will keep